Alright, so our ninth lesson here is trig ratios and angle measures. Okay, last time we were talking about how to find side lengths using trig ratios. Now we're going to take a look at finding angle measures, missing angle measures, using those trig ratios. Okay, so your learning target is I can use trig ratios to find angle measures in right triangles and to solve real world problems. So first, let's explain what inverse trig functions are. And so if we have the sine of some angle A and it's equal to some number x, then the inverse of sine, that's what this sine to the -1 means. It means the inverse of sine of x is equal to the measure of angle A. So you're going to pretty much put this same blank right up here. Okay, and all that means is that the inverse, you can use the inverse of a trig function to be able to find what the angle measure is using the side lengths. Okay, so same thing, if the cosine of some angle A is equal to x, then the inverse of cosine of x is equal to the measure of angle A. And if tangent of angle A is equal to x, then the inverse of the tangent of x is equal to the measure of angle A. Okay, so your key concept here is in order to find the missing angle measure in a right triangle, the first thing we need to do is identify the trig ratio needing to be used. That's that sine, cosine, or tangent. And then we use the sides in the inverse trig function to find the missing angle. Okay, so this time we're using the sides in the inverse trig function to find the missing angle. Inverse is that blank there. And then the second thing we need to do is substitute the given values and solve. So example 1 gives us that opportunity to kind of use the inverse trig functions. And so what it says here is to find each angle measure to the nearest degree. Remember in the inverse trig function I said that if you had the sine of some angle and it was equal to something, then really the inverse of whatever it's equal to would be your angle measure. Okay, so if you have the sine of x and it's equal to 0.9925, what you do is you take your calculator and we're going to use the inverse sine function, which means you got to press second and then go to sine. Sine is this button right down here. Okay, that is your inverse sine function, all right? Inverse trig function. Then type in 0.9925, press enter, and we see that we get this number. That is the measure of the angle that we're looking for. Now it says to round to the nearest degree. This 9 is going to round that 2 up, which means that our x is equal to 83 degrees. X is equal to 83 degrees. Okay, now we do the same thing for cosine of x that is equal to 0.1908. We just do the inverse of cosine, 0.1908, press enter, and we see we get 79 degrees. So x is equal to 79 degrees. And same thing here with tangent. Do the inverse of tangent of 1.1918. Press enter, and we see we get 50 degrees. X is equal to 50 degrees. So example 2 says to find the measure of the indicated angle to the nearest degree. And the first thing we need to do is identify which ones are each of these sides. We know the one across from the right angle is always our hypotenuse. The angle in question is right here, which means opposite that. This needs to be our opposite angle, and finally our adjacent angle is the one that's lying right next to it. Okay, that's an easy way to try to figure out which sides are which, is first identifying the hypotenuse, then the opposite, then the adjacent. Okay, so now our trig functions, what they do is they help us try to find missing side lengths. Okay, what this one is doing, because we're missing an angle, we have to use the inverse trig function. And we see we have the a and the h, which means we're going to be using cosine, because cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And because we're trying to find the missing angle measure, we have to use the inverse cosine function. So the inverse cosine function of x is equal to 13 over 14. okay? Because that 13 over 14 is our adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, now this is just solving. We go to our calculator here. We press the inverse of cosine of 13 divided by 14. That's the same as a fraction. Press enter, and we get this right here, 21.786. But remember, we're supposed to round to the nearest degree, which means we round up to 22. And therefore, our angle in question, which you can just leave as x, is equal to 22 degrees. All right, example 3, it says find the measure of the indicated angle to the nearest degree. So first, we have our hypotenuse here. Opposite side length is here, and that means that 38 is our adjacent. And we can see, because we have the opposite and the adjacent, we're going to be using our tangent function. And tangent, the inverse of tangent, is opposite over adjacent, which means we have to put our 9 over 38. And then solve. So we're going to get our calculator, use the inverse tangent function of 9 divided by 38, and we get 13.3, which we will leave as 13 degrees. So our missing angle measure is 13 degrees. Okay, make sure you show all your work. Don't just try to skip steps and just use the calculator. It's good to write everything out.